Today marks World Creativity and Innovation Day. This year's theme is Inspire. The day is meant to encourage everyday creativity in homes, schools and communities. Global creative coach and founder of Innotivity Institute, Michael Lee, joins me in studio to tell us the significance of the day. Michael, appreciate you coming onto the show today. We were talking a little bit earlier that your shirt suggests that you are a creative. Is everybody creative?
Yeah, thanks. The shirt is designed to express creativity for sure. It says creative on it, in fact. But yeah, everybody is creative. That's one of the big things that I think if there's one thing about today celebrating World Creativity and Innovation that people can take away, if the one thing they take away is that you are creative, Everyone is creative. And a lot of people feel they're not. They think they're not creative enough. Interesting statistic, right? The Adobe, Adobe, the company that does PDFs and stuff, they do a survey every 5 years or so to check various people's opinions about creativity, various aspects. And the average person scores a 4 out of 10 on their own impression of their creativity, right? Now, that's statistically wrong. The average person must be 5, right? So the average person generally tends to think they're less creative than they should be.
Actually are.
But the thing is, we're born creative. That's what human beings are, right? So it's actually a big fallacy people have that I'm not as creative as others.
But let's talk about society, and obviously I'd like to suppose that society in many ways stifles or can stifle creativity, because you'll find that in the more liberal countries, I'd like to think, you generally get more creative people than in more conservative countries. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, the second part, I am not so sure about. That sounds certainly valid, but definitely society stifles creativity, right? School is known to stifle creativity. Statistics have shown that 5-year-old children, almost every single one of them, are creative geniuses. And by the time we get to the age of 15, you want to take a guess at what percentage of 15-year-olds scored as creative geniuses on this particular study?
Sheesh. I've been guessing this week and failing badly. So let us know.
12.
12. Wow.
12%, right? So we go from 98% to 12% between 5 and 15. And by the time you and I have reached our 20s, 2% of us remain at the same level of creativity as the age of 5. Now, people generally blame school for that. There's a very famous TED Talk. It's the most watched TED Talk of all time by Dr. Ken Robinson. It talks about how schools stifle creativity. But you're very right. Society has always wanted us to do the same things the same way again and again, right? So that we could succeed. That's how we succeed in society. In fact, only 2%, same number, which is interesting, same number of people that are still creative geniuses as adults. Only 2% of people in a society need to be creative, according to an old book by a guy named Oswald Spengler called Decline of the West, written about 100 years ago. He said 2% of people need to be creative. The rest of people in society don't need to be. Problem is, right, that has changed. In the last 50 years or so, since a book called Future Shock was put out in 1970, predicted that there was a shift, greatest shift in the history of human beings, was said. A shift from things being, the success coming from repeating what was working before, to actually success coming from doing something different, being creative. Because the rate of change, technical change, has sped up so much. Right? And COVID just made that worse. Right? Because things changed so fast. We had to pivot. We had to innovate quickly. But the problem is society not only discourages creativity and innovation, but companies also discourage it. Right?
So let me come in there, Michael. And I want to talk a little bit about Inspire, which is the theme of this week of World Creativity Innovation Week.
Sure.
So let's talk about where the inspiration lies. And, going back to old adage, necessity is the mother of invention, they say. And it was pretty clear when COVID came and people had to work, but they couldn't go to the office, that they could work from home. And that, for me, is an element of creativity. But 2 weeks prior, right, companies have said, there's no way you can work from home. We expect you to output from the office.
That's right. Yeah. It was impossible, right? And suddenly the next day it was possible. Right? It was simply an attitude and a shift. That's why a lot of what creativity and innovation is about is an attitude, is a mindset. Right? It's a perspective. So that's why very much that term inspire is very important, right? Because inspire, take a breath, Right? That's inspiration, right? Breathing in. It's that easy to be inspired. We don't, I've got a talk that I did yesterday in Nigeria online, and I'm doing today in Kiev, actually, Ukraine, about inspiration. That creativity and inspiration are actually as natural as breathing, right? You don't ever stop breathing, right?
Well, not if you want to live.
Exactly. And creativity is the same way, right? If you really want to live, if you want to thrive, you be creative that easily. Breathe in, breathe out, right? Breathe in, take in inspiration, then be creative. And notice, in order to be inspired, you have to be creative. You have to breathe out in order to breathe in again, right?
So, Michael, let's talk about inspiration.
Sure.
And the factors to this inspiration, the impediments, if you will. I mean, you're doing a talk, as you say, to Kiev, individuals who've suffered a lot of hardship, and for all intents and purposes, aren't probably feeling very, very inspired or creative.
Yeah.
What does that talk sound like, and how do you battle some of these stiflers of creativity?
We only have 15 minutes, right? but
10 now.
10 now. So to summarize, I guess, in a brief way, right? There are people who have gone through very bad situations and are very extremely creative, extremely active, and there are people that have actually thrived in their lives and been given every opportunity, and they're not, right? So although I don't think it's fair to say, I don't think that the greatest impediment is what happens outside us. Right, and as much as we can all look at people and say this person has suffered more, we don't know. We've all suffered in various ways, right? But the biggest impediment to creativity, I believe, number one, is the belief that we started with that I'm not creative enough, right? The second big impediment is that it is difficult, right, or something that is like takes effort or takes some kind of special skill. There's no skill involved in being creative, right? Innovation sometimes takes a bit of skill because it depends on the environment. To innovate, just to distinguish this, creativity is really just thinking, right? Thinking differently than yourself. So if you think differently than other people, that's terrific. But if you keep thinking the same way over and over again, differently than other people, eventually it's not very useful, right? Because the problem with creativity and innovation is it's designed to solve problems, right? So if you're encountering a problem here and you approach it from the place that you're just coming from normally, that problem may not be solvable by you the way you are, so you need to shift who you are, right? So the third biggest impediment to creativity is an unwillingness to change. And that also means a sort of addiction to who we see ourselves as. So if I see myself, right, as a certain way, and that's the only way I am, if I'm not flexible, I'm not adaptable, then when I encounter a problem, I'm not going to be able to be creative the way that problem demands. You see what I mean? So that, I think, is probably the biggest of all of the impediments, right? Is that adaptability is the most important skill today, the most important, more important than knowing how to code computers or knowing how to read and write even. Being able to adapt to change, as we saw with COVID, right? And it's getting more and more important because jobs are, changing. The job that my daughter, who's 18 and studying in college right now, if she goes to graduate school and, maybe starts working at the age of 25, the job she has is 70% likely to be a job that doesn't exist today at all, right? And the tasks that she needs to know, that knowledge she needs for that job right now, in 2 years, 50% of that knowledge will be obsolete.
So obviously, all that speaks to adaptability.
Adaptability, which is creativity and innovation. Same thing.
But it brings back the question that we talked about in the schools, and the fact that the schools are not fostering sufficient levels of creativity. How do we change that?
Well, look, I'm not an expert in schools, right? But what I know is that the problem with schools is that they try to teach people to all be the same. Right? They're all built from the first industrial revolution structure and mindset, right? So they're built from a place of let's get everybody to learn the same things and let's get everybody to fit into the same models. The way to adapt that I've learned about so far is some of the more advanced types of education. I won't name specific models, but where they individualize education more, where they are able to offer students the chance to learn according to what they want to learn and what they need to learn by providing, say, video learning part of the time for them to choose what they're studying at a much earlier age, right? But the most important part is the idea of, we have moved away from an information age, right, to a more knowledge-based age, which is what do you do with the information. So we need to start teaching how to think, not teaching information so much as we do. Because look, you take the phone out of your pocket or that iPad in front of you, you can answer questions that it would have taken us in the past to go to a scholar at a university on a hill to get him to tell us the answer. But today you can tell me the answer in 30 seconds, right? And I don't have to have an argument with you over dinner about it. We can finish it and enjoy our dinner, right? But what is different today is we need to know how to think, and we need to know how to unlearn and relearn, and that's what we have to teach in school at any level.
So, which are the most creative nation, or which are the most creative people? Do you have an answer to that?
I do not. I do not.
Or do you refuse to say?
No, there's no statistic for it. I'd just be making it up, right? There's no statistic that says who's the most creative people. But I can tell you this. It doesn't have to do with wealth, right? It doesn't have to do with... I mean, Africa is a very creative place.
But is creativity relative? I mean, I'd like to imagine that it is, because if we talked about the situations that we find ourselves in, I mean, we go back to hundreds of thousands of years ago and look at the Egyptians, for instance, and the building of the pyramids, or the Zimbabwe ruins that have no mortar but still stand several meters high.
Right.
Speaks to creativity based on a particular situation, but they're not skyscrapers that you see in New York or some of the world's big cities.
Right.
So my question is, is creativity relative?
Well, relative, yeah. I mean, again, creativity, in my definition, is thinking differently from yourself, right?
From myself.
From yourself. Innovation is applying creativity in action. In other words, acting differently from yourself. Right? So at the time when Egyptians made the pyramids, it was a creative act. And if we went and copied the pyramids and made the same things using the technology we have today, it wouldn't be very impressive, right?
No.
But Jack Ma, I'm going to just point this out. Jack Ma wrote an article in the New York Times a couple of years ago where he said that Africa was the most innovative place in the world. Just to answer your question, that's just an opinion from Jack Ma. It's not necessarily the truth. But he said it was the most innovative place because people in Africa are always forced to innovate all the time in order to adapt to the low amount of resources that they have. So the fact that you can build skyscrapers doesn't necessarily mean you're creative, right? And then there's an ongoing argument one could make about creativity, what does it really mean? Because when we talk about AI, right, I did a piece for the Mail and Guardian this week about how AI and creativity are potentially at odds with each other. Artificial intelligence does create, but is it creative, right? So it really depends on your definition of the words, right? But, and it can have a robust discussion for hours about, is artificial intelligence actually creative, or does it just create, which are two different things.
So before we let you go, how can creativity and innovation be used to promote sustainable development and address the challenges facing Africa and obviously other developing countries across the globe?
Well, look, you've already touched on it, right? There's an element in which, building things is a creative act, right? William Kakamba, the guy who built the windmill in Malawi, it was a very famous story, right? He created that from nothingness. He didn't have a clue how to build a windmill. He went and learned how to do it. He found the parts to do it in a way that nobody had ever done. Basically, what's interesting, too, just to point out, is that World Creativity Day today is a day that was connected to Earth Day tomorrow intentionally, because the idea was to use creativity as a way to promote and connect to doing something important, meaningful, right? So if you want to solve challenges, creativity and innovation are the way to solve them, right? Because if they're not solved, it means a different way has to be used. So it's kind of a circular question in a way, because the questions we need to achieve, the goals we need to achieve, the innovations we have to have, can only come through creative thinking and innovation, right? They can't come through any other way.
So let's talk about what's happening globally around the World Annual Creativity and Innovation Week. What are some of the activities? What can we expect? Besides listening to some of your chats online, what else is happening? There's
so many I can't even begin to count them, right? If you go to the website wciw.org, there's a ongoing list of celebrations in over 150 countries around the world. I'm personally on the advisory board of the World Creativity and Innovation Week/Day, because it's actually a whole week that culminates today. And there's 3 advisors in Africa, but there's advisors all over the world. It's a worldwide organization. So literally there are activities. Some are in person, some are online events, some are just people, having a meeting of some kind. Some are big parties. There's things all over the world to mark this day as something people should pay attention to, and really a thrust to start bringing it to run throughout the year. So there's constantly some kind of activity marking why creativity is important.
How can we measure the impact of creativity and innovation on society? And what are some of the metrics that are used to do this assessment?
That's a fabulous question. So basically, it's a very hard thing to measure, right? Mm-hmm. This is something I train companies in creative thinking and innovation, and it's very hard to go in there and say, like, what is the actual impact here, right? The way you can really measure it is that looking at what are we achieving that's different, how are we advancing or shifting, how are we solving our problems. There's not like a good number that you can put to it, right? But if you look at what is it that's happening. That's different and new, it's always going to be a factor of creative thinking. And I think AI, again, is an interesting point there when we look at the impact that's having. I mean, here's a measure I can give you that relates to automation. It's not just AI, but it relates to automation, and it's a very interesting one because it connects to creativity, right? The World Economic Forum projected a couple of years back that by 2025 already, we would about 85 million jobs would be lost to various forms of automation, but 97 million would be gained by the same process. Now, McKinsey & Company said that 400 to 500 by 2030, 400 to 500 million jobs would be lost, but again, more would be gained. So you could measure, for example, the shifting in the kinds of work that are existing, right? The differences in jobs. Like I said, the amount of information that is changing. The information in 1900, the information in the world doubled every 100 years, right? By 1970, when Future Shock was published, information was doubling about every year, and today it's doubling every 12 hours or less.
Wow.
So, soon it might be doubling every hour. And this kind of adds up to the weird thing that like a baby that's born today will have double the amount of information that is available to it by the time it's half a day old, right? So those are the kind of measures you can look at in terms of, how creation of information. This is information we're creating, right? We're not finding it. We're creating this information. So, that is one measure of it, is how much it's changing the nature of what it means to be a human being working in the job force.
I'd hope that would be my last question, but creative juices are flowing.
Good. I'm glad I can help.
How can policymakers and leaders in government and industry be encouraged to prioritize creativity, certainly for the benefit of a country? I mean, if you look at South Africa, we're struggling with load shedding, for instance. What can be done to inspire creativity and obviously innovation to resolve some of the challenges that we're facing?
It's a fantastic question, right? Because one of the things that one of the radio shows I go on, the guy that hosts the show always talks about the least creative place in the world is politics, right? Because that's the place where most of the people involved in politics are doing what they think works, right? They don't look for new ways to do things. It's very rare that happens. So I think that's what's important to answer your question, because it's a tough one, is, how do we do it? We keep showing them how important it is. That's the only thing we can do. I mean, most of the time, policymakers and stuff aren't going to pay attention to. There's very few of them, right? There are some, right? But we have to keep showing them how important it is. Keep bringing me on the show, and I'll keep talking about why it's important. And we keep talking about that. We keep showing them the statistics of the difference it makes when we encourage, and like you said, help young children, help people to encourage them to maintain their creativity, not have it stifled. And I can get into a whole long talk about how we stifle our creativity willingly as human individuals because of our attachment to who we are and what we believe about ourselves, right? But when you're talking about policy and stuff, I think the most important thing is just keep pointing out how important it is. Keep pointing out the achievements we have. Quote people like Jack Ma and say, look, he's saying Africa is the most innovative place on earth. Let's encourage that. Let's promote that.
Michael Lee, appreciate your time. Global creative coach and founder of the Innotivity.
Innovation, creativity, innotivity.
Innotivity, well, appreciate your time this morning. And this week marks the 20th Annual World Creativity and Innovation Week.